joining us. If this is your first webinar with us, my name's Chris. I am the co-founder of UK Homes Network. If you've never come across us before, we are the UK's first social media platform exclusively for the property industry. So it's a way that people can network, talk about what's happening within the industry, share discussion points, and even promote their business, all through an app or a web-based platform. And you can sign up for that for free, and I'll put the link in the chat now. So if you want to carry on the conversation after this webinar, if you want to raise any further questions, or even if you just want to network with Antoni, Antoni's been a long-standing member of UK Homes Network and a massive advocate for us. So you'll find him in there posting quite regularly. And obviously, if you want to sort of continue the conversation afterwards, you can do in UK Homes Network. So I've put the links in the chat there if you want to sign up. As I say, it is free and you can create a profile within seconds and start networking with hundreds of other property professionals from across the country. So thank you for joining us today. As I said, I'm joined by one of one of my good friends and a massive support to UK Homes Network. Antoni's been offering advice for quite a while and giving out information on the different kinds of insurances that are available to UK Homes Network members. So we thought it's a perfect opportunity to get him on a webinar and sort of dispel some of the myths around insurance, and particularly some of the issues that can go wrong on site, and how people like Bridge support developers and make sure that things are not as stressful as they need to be. So Antoni, how are you?
I'm all right, thank you very much. Excited for this session. So thanks for having me. And yeah, I'm a keen supporter of UK Homes Network. Ever since we first met, Chris, I've been really excited by the network, by what it's becoming, and it's great. Every time I log on, I see more people have joined. So yeah, it's brilliant.
Thanks, mate. Yeah, it's down to people like yourself that have been sort of waving the banner for it, and I really appreciate that. But you've already been massively helping some of our members in the platform with Bridge Insurance. Bridge, last week, we announced that we've officially partnered with you guys as our main insurance partner for the platform. So could you just, for people that don't know you, could you just give a context as to who you are and how you are in specializing in latent defects?
Yeah, absolutely. So so as it would suggest, we're an insurance broker. Usually when you're at a networking event and you say insurance broker, you get people quickly finish their drink and move on to the next person. But we've got you captive audience on this webinar now, so I suppose you could log off, but hopefully you stay tuned. So we're a general commercial insurance broker, so we work with all sorts of businesses. The vast majority of what we do is real estate, property, construction. I specialize in latent defects insurance, also generally property and construction. So what that means is that we're working with property professionals, property developers, property owners, property investors, contractors, really throughout the entire development project life cycle, assisting with their insurances, basically helping them protect their investments, protect their projects, and ultimately protect their businesses. My general ethos around insurance is that it should be there to enable clients. It should be there to enable developers, so they can use insurance as a tool to quite literally transfer risk, but a tool to basically allow them to be a bit more responsive, be a little bit more flexible to opportunities that come their way if they know that they've got their interests covered from an insurance perspective. So that ties in, I think, quite nicely with Scott Williams's webinar last week, where he talked about assembling the professional team and having that power team. If you've got a decent insurance broker in your power team, as it were, then you should be able to make better, faster, more informed decisions about opportunities.
Definitely. So yeah, obviously an insurance broker is an essential part of the power team, because you're basically there to manage risk that goes on a development.
That's it. Yeah, there to kind of help them along the way, in the wings, as it were. So quite a lot of the time, I'll get clients that will ring me and say, I'm looking at this development. What do you think? And obviously, I'm an insurance broker, so I'm not going to tell them about the finances of that project or any reinstatement costs of that project or that side of it. But I can look at it and say, okay, well, these are the insurances that you need to consider to kind of de-risk it as much as you can for yourself. This is probably what it's going to cost you. These are the considerations you need to think about. And sometimes it will be a case where, a lot of the time it's, last minute. Developer might be looking at something that they're buying at auction or that they've been offered, where it's a part complete site where someone's gone insolvent and they've got the opportunity to pick it up at a fairly good rate. They need to know that if they do pick it up at a fairly good rate, that they're going to be able to insure it. And obviously, latent defects forms a really important part of that, because without the latent defects insurance, also known as a building warranty, it will make it more difficult to finance or to sell at the end.
Great. So we'll get on to latent defects in a second, but what are the sort of different types of insurances that are available on site or for a property developer or people within the property industry?
Yeah, good question. So basically, so as a business, we will assist developers and property people throughout that development life cycle. So typically that will include when they come to purchase a site, there might be a legal indemnity that's required in order to get a completion over the line. Once they've purchased it, they might need a land liability policy, some kind of public liability or third-party liability to protect their interests once they own that property. They might need something to cover the existing structure if there are any existing structures that are being retained. Then when they move on to the build, they'll need their typical construction insurances. At that point, they'll also buy their latent defects or their building warranty. They might also need performance bonds for contractors. They might need a host of other add-ons and extensions to those policies throughout the build. And then at the end, once it's built, once they've got the completed asset, they need to make sure that it transfers onto a suitable buildings insurance policy. So that's really important as well. So we'll get involved, as I say, really as a part of the professional team for that developer and help them along the way and make sure that try and mitigate any gaps in cover as best we can.
Great. So yeah, in terms of latent defects, then what is latent defects? What does that mean?
Yeah, it's quite a technical sounding phrase, isn't it? Versus building warranty. Building warranty is like a lot more easy to understand, sounds a lot softer. And latent defects insurance or inherent defects insurance, that's the sort of technical official kind of word for it. And effectively what it covers is any inherent structural defects that are as a result of poor workmanship, poor materials, poor design, that are not visible. And the idea of the latent or the inherent bit is that it's a defect that's not hasn't been picked up throughout the construction, but comes to light later on. So after post completion, it by virtue of physical damage or threat of physical damage or imminent collapse due to an inherent defect in design, workmanship, and materials, that's effectively what it covers, and for a period of 10 years. 10 or 12 years.
Right, cool. So this is something that I from my time as an estate agent, that knowing working with new builds and stuff like that, not many people are actually aware of is covered on the property. So when something does go wrong, you've obviously got 10 years that potentially covers that. So
yeah,
the property itself that's covered, is it the developer or is it the person that's purchasing the property?
It's so good question. So the onus is on the developer to buy the policy, but it's interesting. It's one of the reasons why latent defects differs to a lot of other insurances in the respect that it's bought by the developer, but really it's to the benefit of the homeowner, because the person who buys that property at the end, and whether that's a homeowner, whether that's a pension fund, or if it's a commercial building, it's bought by a business. The beneficiary becomes whoever owns that property. So the insurance, whilst bought ideally before construction starts, the cover actually comes into place at completion, runs for that 10 or 12 years, and is to the benefit of, it stays with that property and is to the benefit of whoever owns it. So if there is any major inherent structural defect with that property, and of course that can be really costly, then yeah, this insurance steps in to cover it. And it's probably a pertinent point to note at this time. So a lot of the time, it's mainly the mortgage lenders or banks essentially that drive the need for this type of insurance. So basically, they like to have their interest protected. So if NatWest Bank are lending on a mortgage to Mr. and Mrs. Jones, they're going to ask: does this property have an annual, buildings insurance policy to cover it against, general perils like fire, lightning, explosion, earthquake, that sort of stuff. But those policies, those annual buildings insurance policies, specifically exclude loss or damage arising from defective materials or faulty workmanship. So it's really important to have a latent defects insurance policy or a building warranty in place to cover the property in the event that it is a fault in design, workmanship, or materials.
Wow. And how long have you been looking after latent defects insurance? How long have you sort of covered this specific area?
Specifically latent defects for coming up to 8 years.
8 years.
Yeah.
Wow. So you've probably seen quite a few issues in terms of defects on site then.
Yeah, we've seen a few. So it's a very, compared to something like your car insurance, where people have prangs all the time, and the losses on car insurance can be something really small, like something fairly inexpensive, like a few scrapes or bumps, right up to a total write-off. So car insurance, you get a quite high claims ratio, like by comparison to something like latent defects. These building warranties, they don't have a hugely high claim rate, and when they do, because it's any major inherent structural defect, so it doesn't cover things like anything cosmetic or anything that's not, as a result, anything that's not major structural inherent, isn't covered. So when there is a claim, it's usually something fairly severe, and that will be something to do with the structure. So it could be to do with foundations, it could be columns, beams, the roof, the external walls, windows, that sort of thing. So it's all like the fairly major things. So if there's a claim, it usually is more costly things to fix.
Right, interesting. So there was when this is going back probably about 10 years ago now, there was a site that was built by a small developer in a town not too far away from me. And they basically built, I think it was like 30 houses.
Okay.
And after completion, they realized that the houses were all built on a different type of land or different sort of, the wrong foundations have been used. They should have been using floating foundations for the settlement. And instead they didn't. They just did it standard. So what ended up happening is all the houses then had structural issues. So after they'd obviously all been bought off plan, people that purchased them couldn't move into the site. Is that something that latent defects would kick in for that kind of thing?
Yeah, it could do. Yeah. So if you could, again, it comes down to the cause of that. If you could show that the cause of that fault was an inherent defect caused by poor design, let's say poor design from the structural engineer or poor design from the architect, or if it was poor workmanship when they did the foundations, then, and it's one of those things, again, at completion, that house would have looked fine. It would have been up. It would have, windows would have been in, doors would have been in. It would have looked fine. It would have looked okay. But over a short period of time, it starts to settle differently. And if that could be as a result of, poor design, let's say, then yeah, it could be covered.
If there's a blame, there's a claim.
Kind of thing. Yeah. I saw an interesting one the other day on LinkedIn. There's a bricklaying contractor that I'm connected with and follow, who's fairly interested and puts quite a lot of interesting stuff up. And he went out to, it was a photo that he posted of a partially built cavity wall, and it was basically taking a photo of the really terrible brickwork that had been done. And one of the major points on it was, you could see any layman could have looked at that and said, well, it doesn't quite look straight. And the insulation didn't quite look that flush or that nice. But there was a really key part in it, that the brick ties, and this is where I'm probably going to get a bit technical. So if there's anyone that's a surveyor or a contractor in the group that knows a bit about bricklaying, then you might have even seen the post. But they put the brick ties in, angling down in towards the building. So what that means is for the rest of us out there is that when water comes through the first brick skin, the external wall, it would penetrate through, hit that the brick tie and run straight into the building. Now, luckily, this particular contractor saw it, noticed it, highlighted it. I assume highlighted it to the owner. And I would imagine that a surveyor would pick that up. And I've seen that before on remediation reports where a surveyor for a building warranty for latent defects insurance has seen that exact problem and said, look, the brick ties are angled down into the building. What that means is that it won't happen overnight, but over a period of months, maybe years, you'll get damp basically in your living room. And that is in effect a latent defect. Now, if had the contractor closed that cavity up before a surveyor saw it, from the outside, it would have looked fine. There would be brick ties in it. It would have DPC. It would look fine from the outside. It would only be later on, by virtue of damage occurring, that you'd have realized there was a problem, and that also could be a latent defect. So in those situations when that happens, one of the other key characteristics of latent defects insurance is site inspections. So surveyor will send out one of their own surveyors or a third-party surveyor that's employed by them to come out and inspect the properties throughout construction, and that's their way of mitigating their own risk. Really, it's their way of spotting things. If there's anything not quite right, they can say, right, you need to fix that. That could be a problem later on. So hopefully on that particular site, a surveyor picked up on that and asked them to redo it. Otherwise, there would definitely be a defect occurring. There'll be someone's living room will get very damp in years to come.
Yeah, I think that video was also on TikTok, because I think
Really?
I've seen that one, with the brick ties that are going down like that.
Yeah. Okay.
But I mean that just shows how crucial it is, because if that property had been closed up, you wouldn't have seen the brick ties pointing downwards, and therefore you wouldn't be able to trace where the damp was coming from unless you were to put what I call basically an endoscope into the cavity. So that's really interesting. Barry's asked a question. Barry, are flat roofs typically covered by these building warranties?
Really good question. Because the answer is yes and no. It depends. It's one of the sort of top tips I would say to developers when looking at this insurance, well, looking at any insurance really. Either have a decent broker that can tell you the ins and outs of what the policy is on offer, or make sure that you're reading a bit of the policy wordings and understanding a little bit about the insurer's definitions and what they're covering. And I have written an article recently about jargon busting for this type of insurance, which might be useful for some people, to help understand a bit more the sort of terms that insurers use in relation to this insurance. But so some policies will include the flat roof, and some will include it, but only with additional security, and that usually comes in the form of an insurance-backed guarantee. So they're fairly common, because any time where water ingress and escape of water are always, I say always, they're pretty large concerns for any insurer in property. And anytime that water can kind of pool on anything, so whether that's a flat roof or like a basement, like in a tanking works in a basement where there's constant water, it runs the risk of there usually, not always, but sometimes that'll be a failure of the materials. A lot of the time it will be a failure of the workmanship. So that's one. And on a side note, that's one of the biggest causes for claims is poor workmanship, which is another reason why the site inspections are so important for the insurers. So an insurance-backed guarantee is basically what that means for the developer is if you've got any flat roofing or tanking, or it can come up for underpinning as well if you've got any existing structures and you're reinforcing foundations and underpinning, then because those items are deemed fairly high risk, the claims data shows they get a lot of claims from those types of things, then some of the insurers will say, right, we want additional security, we want an insurance-backed guarantee. What that means is that the contractor or the roofing subcontractor, or sometimes just the developer, will have to provide a written guarantee saying, we guarantee the materials and workmanship for this bit of flat roofing to the contract value of X and for 10 years. We then insurance back that. So if there is a claim to do with that specific thing in that period, during the cover, it will basically bounce back to that contractor to come back and fix it. So it's a really good question from Barry, and it's one of the reasons why I kind of stress, one of my kind of top tips, as I say, is to make sure you understand your policy, make sure you understand what's covered and what's not covered. Don't always just go for the cheapest policy. The cheapest is sometimes the best, but not always.
Great. I hope that answers your question, Barry. If anyone's got any more questions, please do either put them into the chat, or we've got a live Q&A option where you can put that in, and we'll get round to that as soon as possible. So you mentioned that obviously with different types of insurance brokers, some cheaper might not be the best. There's some red flags that you can look out for in terms of, choose an insurance broker, because you mentioned there that you provided a jargon buster. So obviously you're trying to be as transparent as possible about what goes into an insurance policy.
Well, I won't comment so much about insurance brokers, because the good thing about our industry is that we're FCA regulated. We have to do our CPD. We have to get qualified in due course. So I think I'll leave that topic, because I think we're a good industry, and I think we're doing good things out there. But when it comes to the actual insurers, obviously it does help to choose an insurance broker that has an understanding of the particular topic. So, for example, don't come to me if you want to insure your horse. I don't know anything about equine insurance, but I can help with property construction, latent defects. So obviously choose a broker that understands what it is that you're doing. In terms of the actual providers, like the actual insurers that are chosen, some important things are, I think the main one is probably the rating of the insurer. So that's the financial rating of the insurer that sits behind the policy. So a lot of time with these latent defects policies, these building warranties, you have the scheme administrator, which are the organization that effectively does your inspections, organizes your surveys, does your reports, and issues your certificate at the end. But behind them will be an actual insurer, and it'll be that insurer that's essentially responsible for paying out in the event of a claim. So if that insurer is not financially stable, then you don't have so many, ideally you'd like to find an insurer that has an A rating or above. And what the A rating means is that they are financially stable, that they have an excellent ability to meet their insurance obligation. What that means is if there is a claim, they should be able to pay out. And also when you're talking about building warranties are 10-year or 12-year policies. If you are looking at annual policies where it's just renewable every year, you're paying a premium for that 1 year. But when you buy a building warranty, it's a 10-year policy, so you're paying the full, basically a 10-year premium up front. So they can be seen as like comparatively expensive compared to annual buildings insurance policies, because it covers for the 10 years. So if the insurer is not financially stable, is not around for the lifetime of that policy, then that obviously poses a problem. That means that if there's a claim, well, if the insurer's not around anymore, who's going to pay the claim? So that's obviously obvious problem number one for homeowner or property owner if the developer retains it or whatever. I'd say that's like a fairly large consideration. And then also the other thing is lenders lists. So not so important with commercial latent defects insurance, because the lenders are a little bit more, often they tend to be a little bit more flexible. But when it comes to residential, each building warranty provider will have an approved lenders list. So it's really important to check which banks accept it. And again, this can be sometimes the more cost-effective options might be the ones where they don't quite have as many banks on the approved lenders list. Sometimes it could be that they don't offer the same level of cover. Maybe it's to do with, water, maybe, nuances in the policies. Like some will cover, for example, some will cover watering risk below ground, some won't, some will with an IBG. I'd say it's just good to understand a little bit more about those points before, just to allow you to make a better decision, really.
Great. And I picked up on something you said there, in terms of the developer. The budget is obviously being released next week. There's a lot of nervousness around the property industry about the way things are going.
Yeah.
I've seen firsthand developers going out of business, appearing on my social media channels of developers saying that they're no longer in business.
Yeah.
That's something that Bridge looks after as well, to ensure that the development's covered if the developer goes out of business.
Yeah, it's good question. So what we tend to push what's called an owner-controlled insurance program. So when you're insuring your construction site, you've got a couple of routes as a developer. You can contract the contractor to arrange the insurances, or you can take control of it yourself and do what's called the owner-controlled route. And that's what we tend. I mean, and we work with both situations, but in a lot of situations, the owner-controlled route is a little bit. I feel it's a little bit more comprehensive, for the reason that should a contractor, and I've had a recent example of a situation where a developer came to me halfway through a build, and it was actually a commercial development that they were doing. It was a warehouse that they were building, and they got halfway through the build, and the main contractor became insolvent, unfortunately, and that meant that their insurances become defunct with them. So what that means is the developer's then left with a part complete or half complete project with no main contractor and no insurance covering the contract works up to that point. So all the money that they had potentially put into building it up to halfway, if there was a problem, some kind of problem on site, and it all fell down or burnt down or whatever, then they would have to start again from scratch. So it would be lost money. So had they insured, luckily that didn't happen in the end. They found a new main contractor, and we helped advise the new contractor on how to ensure that the existing contract works up to that point were included in the cover, and then for the rest of the project. But had the developer insured on an owner-controlled basis, so that they were in control of that construction wrap policy, there would obviously, it's unfortunate that the contractor became insolvent, but it would have made their lives a little bit easier. It would have been a little less worrying, and there would have been no time where there was that gap in cover where the first contractor had disappeared and that project had effectively no contract works cover for that period. So yeah, that hopefully that answers your point and your question. And on that project, I'll keep talking if nobody's bored of my voice by now. But we helped with the LDI on that. So how that came up. So building warranties come up, as I said, largely driven by the mortgage lenders. It's the mortgage lenders that won't lend on a property unless it's on a residential property, or it makes it much harder for them to lend on a property that doesn't have a building warranty on it. But it comes up in the commercial world as well, and that can be a commercial lender, or it can be certainly in development finance. But in this particular situation, for that particular developer, where they were building this warehouse, they were in talks with a large logistics company. I won't say the name, but if I said the name, you would all know who they were. And the logistics company were in the throes of negotiating a contract, and it was under an FRI lease, a fully repaired and insured lease, long-term, 10+ years. And part of the negotiation was, they said, okay, brilliant, this all looks great, expecting a completion date of X. Where's your latent defects insurance? And to which the developer said, well, it's a commercial project. Why do I need? I didn't buy one because I didn't think I needed one on a commercial project. And they said, well, no, we want one, because if we're going to take this property on for the next 10-15 years, and we're going to be responsible for fully repairing and insuring this project, what happens because remember, they'll buy a buildings insurance policy or some kind of property owner's policy to cover that, but that policy will exclude loss or damage arising from defective materials or workmanship. So what happens in that instance if there is a latent defect causing a major structural problem? What do they do? So that was when the developer approached me and said, look, this is the situation I'm in. Obviously, we gave him some helpful advice around the contracting side and making sure that the continuation of cover with the new contractor happened. And we got him the latent defects policy, which will step in at completion. And we were able to note the logistics company as a joint insured on that policy as well. So that kept them happy. And that basically meant that from day one, as soon as that project is built, they've obviously invested a fair bit of their capital into building that development. That means that by securing a long-term tenant in that way, it means that from day one, as soon as they're complete and that tenant move in, there's no empty time, there's no void period. It's a new tenant straight in there, and they're earning money on the investment straight away. So yeah, that was a fairly good win from our point.
Great. And yeah, guys, I'm just going to give you all a chance to get your questions in. So if you have got any questions for Antoni, then please do drop them in the chat. Obviously, if you don't feel comfortable putting them in the chat, you can always sign up to UK Homes Network for free. Antoni will be in the platform straight after this webinar, so you can drop him a message. If you've got a particular case that you want to query with him, or something quite specific, then please do drop him a message in UK Homes Network after this. So Antoni, in terms of being in latent defects for 8 years, have you got any particular stories that stand out? Any particular clients that you've worked with that I know we've mentioned a few there, but is there any?
Yeah. Probably it depends how long you've got. Yeah, plenty of stories from over the years. I think the point some of the points I just want to kind of reiterate for developers, because obviously I can talk forever and a day about this topic, which might some people might be interested in. Some people might think he's said enough now. But some of the kind of top tips around kind of mitigating risk of latent defects occurring and of having an easier process on site. So when it comes to choosing the provider, one of the key things is that surveying. I've mentioned about the surveying element of it. It's a way for the insurers to mitigate their risk by coming and checking what's going on throughout. But it's a good thing for the developer. A lot of developers appreciate that, because it's an extra bit of kind of almost like quality control in a way, where they're getting more sets of eyes on their development to make sure things are going correctly. But sometimes it can be one of the bigger kind of pain points for developers is those technical inspections, because they'll have their building control and building regulations inspections, and that inspector, and it may well be a separate surveyor coming out to do the building warranty. And there are ways that we can team those together in some situations where it can be the same surveyor, but a lot of times, and with the way that things are going, it tends to be two surveyors. So that can be a challenge for the guys on site to arrange those inspections and make sure they're happening. So I would say it's really important for developers to just make sure that they're in good communication with their surveyor. And before they choose their insurer, one of the things they should be looking at and asking about is, what is the technical process like? What's the surveying process like? Does the insurer have their own in-house surveying team, or is it an external one? Do they have surveyors local to this project, or are they going to send someone from 200 miles away? If you can have a bit of an understanding around what that process will be like, that can help to steer what direction you go in with the insurer, because it may well be that one's 10% more expensive, but they've got their own surveyor who's based around the corner from you, who you can call out, with half an hour, well, maybe not with half an hour's notice, but you can call out with much shorter notice than you would another insurer who might have been a little bit less, less expensive, but you've got to wait a week to get a survey booked in, that sort of thing. So it's worth considering that. Once you've got that surveyor, obviously communicate with them effectively. When they do their inspections, they will produce a report. So make sure you're organised and you're confirming that either the report was all A-OK, all green lights, no problems. If there is any remediations or any advice from the surveyor, that you look into it and try to resolve it as promptly as possible. Because remember, on a building site, in a development, things are constantly moving. As a developer, you've got 1,000,001 things to organize, and trades are moving around, doing all different things. And what one trade does, another trade might come and cover up the following day. So there's things that might be things that need to be seen. So communication is really key. Fixing the remediations promptly, and then my third tip on that is just make sure you take plenty of photos and document as much as you can. Because whilst insurers are, everyone's using technology these days, and insurers are fairly good. And I haven't heard any horror stories recently, but in the past, sometimes you can fall down in communications with the surveying teams, fall down in communications between the technical teams in-house and the surveying teams, or a surveyor, leaves and goes to another, joins another provider, and then the relationship, the back and forth of exchange of information you had somehow gets lost in the ether. In those situations, it's really helpful. If that does ever happen to you, in those situations, it's really, really helpful if your site manager or your project manager or your cost consultant or you yourself has got plenty of photos, plenty of documentation, so that if there ever was a question towards the end where, for example, you get to completion and all of a sudden the person who's signing off your project and about to issue you your certificate, and remember, as a developer, you need that building warranty certificate, because that's the thing. If you've got a sale that's waiting to go through, Mr. and Mrs. Jones waiting to move in, and they've got their mortgage offer in principle about to expire and they're waiting to complete, you need that certificate so that to allow them to get that completion. The last thing you want is for that technical team to throw up, oh, what about those brick ties? Did you ever fix those brick ties? And then you go, what brick ties? That was a year ago that came up. Well, we think we fixed it. We know we fixed it, but was there any documentation at your end? So in those situations, if anything like that was to ever happen, if you had your own photographs and your own documentation of it to show that it was done and it was done properly, then you can quell those things and keep things moving when it comes to the sharp end at getting certs issued. So hopefully that helps everyone.
Amazing. Hello. Thank you very, very much, Antoni. I really appreciate it for joining us. And he's just popped a question in. So can you give us some typical costs to the developer for latent defects insurance, please?
Yeah.
Sorry, regarding a new build 5-bed detached 8-unit apartment block. Oh, sorry, e.g. New build 5-bed detached 8-unit apartment block, large HMO conversion, etc.
I can. Obviously, every project is different. Obviously, I have to caveat that every project is different. Insurers have different appetites and different ratings for different types of projects. A lot of it will come down to the professional team experience that we can provide. So as a broker, we spend a lot of our time asking good questions, compiling good information, and things like understanding financial situation of contractors involved, understanding if you get portfolio or CV of the kind of works they've done. Those kinds of things we can use to help get better premiums. As a very sort of rough rule of thumb, and it really does depend on all those things, plus the size of the project, you can probably budget for about 1.5% of the sum insured. And that will vary. If it's a conversion, it might be more, it could well be more than that. If it's a bog standard new build, it could be less than that. There is a kind of economy of scale with it as well. If it's one unit, one single unit will be more expensive per unit than if you did 10, because of surveyor fees and stuff. But generally speaking, if you can budget for around 1.5%, happy to help. If anybody wants to, obviously, hopefully my details are on UK Homes Network, or you can find me on LinkedIn. Happy to answer calls, answer questions, emails anytime. If you want to send a bit more information over on reinstatement costs or expected build costs for something like that, and floor areas, then I can give you a slightly more accurate estimation.
Amazing. All right. Well, thanks, guys. I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate you joining us today, Antoni. We've got another webinar coming up in November, so that will be on connecting utilities to your site. So we've got Ben and Louise of BTS Property Consultancy that specialise in wayleaves, easements, and connecting utilities on site. So if that's of interest, then you can register for that now in the UK Homes Network app. Hopefully, we'll see you all in there. Antoni's able to drop you a message if you want to drop him a message further on anything you've heard today, then please do. Antoni, other than UK Homes Network, how can people find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn and also on the Bridge Insurance website, bridgeinsurance.co.uk. My details are on there under the Latent Defects part. And I'll also put a message into the UK Homes Network after this with my telephone number and email address as well.
Amazing. Yeah, guys, and if you had to drop off at any point, we've had a solid audience right the way through, so obviously everyone was thoroughly entertained by Antoni's insights, but their recording of this webinar will be available in UK Homes Network, so if you want to check this back at a later stage, you can do. So that's all from me, and thanks, Antoni, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris, really appreciate it. Thanks guys for joining, hope it was all right, and yeah, hopefully catch up with you all soon.
Brilliant. Cheers, mate. Take care.